Hey everyone, Scott Hansen here from NFL Red Zone. I hope you're checking out 1 hour of 5-Yard Rush, one of the best podcasts on NFL football in the UK.
Hey, what's happening, Rush Nation? I can't believe it. It's week 1. We're now here. The football season is about to start, 3 days away. So really not that long to think about getting those lineups set up. And it's the day that we all wait for every single year. Everybody is 0-0. Everybody is in with a chance of making the Super Bowl. It's going to be an absolutely fantastic season. I feel like this summer has really sort of dragged on a lot longer than normal, at least for me personally, maybe not necessary for all of you, but it's really good to be back and doing this. And the next 17, 18 weeks are going to be chaotic and they're going to be stressful, but they're also going to be a lot of fun as well. And I can't wait to watch the games here. So as per usual, I'm back with the Waiver Wire. Slightly different this year in the sense of Stacey's going to be writing the Waiver Wire article. He's going to have his own picks, his own takes on it. I'm going to be focusing purely on the audio format. So I will put a link to Stacey's picks, but they are going to be different from mine. They might not always be different. He will have his view. I will have mine. Definitely recommend reading the article. It's going to be linked to this podcast every single week. It's always good to get different perspectives, different people, and understanding the analysis and the reasons why people are leaning towards the way that they do. For me, week 1, there's less statistical analysis here because we haven't got much data other than what we've seen previously. It's more about thinking about a short to medium term. So thinking about players who could potentially have an impact week 1 and maybe a couple of instances where a player could have an impact week 1, go up in value and actually have a role moving forward. So it's kind of a bit of a balance here, plus with some streamer picks as well that are purely just week 1 centered. And then as we go through the weeks, I'll explain all the picks and everything. The thing I would say with Fab this week is try not to spend any. If you can get away with not spending Fab, it's just not really worth spending Fab before week 1. It just puts you at a disadvantage. Plenty of players in your league probably switch off until they set their first roster anyway, so you can get these guys on 0 bids if you have Fab. Fine to spend $1. Wouldn't really spend anything more on any of these players. It's just not worth it at this stage. So if you can get these guys on waivers or $0 bids, then absolutely, maybe even a cheeky $1 bid. I wouldn't spend any more than that. Certainly wouldn't be spending multiple dollars on any of these players unless there was a really dire situation, in which case DM me at Murf_NFL and we can absolutely talk about that. So let's get straight into it. 2 quarterbacks potentially to consider for week 1. I'm going to start with Ryan Tannehill. Really unpopular in drafts this year. He's only 15.9% owned. He has the New York Giants week 1. Now, I understand why. They've drafted Malik Willis. There's concern whether he's going to be there long term. Is he going to make the season? But Ryan Tannehill, I know he didn't have the best year last year, but he has had consecutive been pushing until last season that top 12. He has a bit of rushing upside. He can rush touchdowns in as well. So he does have some real significant upside, and especially when I'm looking at players that are in his ADP range and players that are in his sort of undrafted category. It really is surprising to see his ownership, because that ownership will be probably dominated by Superflex league, Superflex players. And maybe dynasty leagues, because this is all ESPN. If you've never tuned into the Waiver Wire show before, I tend to pick players that are under 30% owned. I'll bring a few that are maybe over 30% owned at the end of each player segment. But looking at this, Ryan Tannehill, 15.9% owned, seems like a bargain. He opens up. He's got really good games to open up. The Giants should be targeting that. The Bills is going to be a game they're going to be playing from behind. We'll need to throw the ball. We've got the Raiders. That for me is like a 50-50 game. So I think it's a good matchup. It's definitely a defense that can be exploited. And then you've got the Colts. So again, another 50-50 divisional game. They'll be throwing the ball a lot. I can see them throwing the ball quite a bit these opening 4 weeks. And so as a result, I really think Tannehill for the opening 4 weeks of the season looks like a really, really good streaming bet. And I think that he's someone with that rushing ability, with that rushing upside. I think he's someone that will give you pretty consistent performance in the first 4 weeks. So if you are struggling at quarterback, and you probably shouldn't be really, but if you were, for whatever reason, he's a good pick to have at this stage. Or if you're streaming and punting the position, he's a good opening starter for you. Matt Ryan's the other one. 22.6% owned. Great matchup this week against Houston. You would expect him to exploit this on the road and really open up well. There's always a slight concern quarterback in his new team, but with a veteran and former MVP like Matt Ryan, I'm not really concerned about how he's going to open up against the Texans. So again, if you're looking for just that week 1 play, Matt Ryan is a good bet here. To move on to, if you're looking at as well, just before I move on, I'm looking at some quarterbacks here. If you're thinking if you didn't take a QB2, I'm looking at the ownership. Now, these are ESPN ownership numbers, and they probably differ per platform. To have a look at this, James Winston, 30.5%. Again, we're talking about former top 3 QB. Justin Fields, with all that rushing ability, he's only 45.2% owned in ESPN leagues. So these are players that I'd be having starred and looking at the waiver wire. Especially with Justin Fields, he's someone for me that I would really like as a QB2 because I think he can put up high QB2, low QB1 numbers. And I think he's going to have some weeks where he's going to really spike with that rushing ability. And I know people are really put off by what he did last year, but I do think there's real opportunity for him to grow. Now that Matt Nagy's gone, now they have a new coaching staff, now they can really sort of push through with a new coaching staff, new scheme, new players, different offensive line. We'll see what happens. Going back into the running backs, Kenyan Drake, talked about him on the show last week. He's 5.9% owned. He has the Jets week 1. Doesn't look like Dobbins is going to go. We know Gus Edwards is on the pup. People are going to sway towards Mike Davis. Kind of know what Mike Davis is. He's a plotter between the tackles. Kenyan Drake, for me, in that pass catching role, is going to bring a little bit more dynamism to the short term. And I think he's someone that is going to have that big playability. And I know he's just been signed off the street, and I know Mike Davis is on the roster. I know people will be sitting there thinking like Mike Davis is going to get the majority of it. And that is 100% in the range of outcomes. That is very, very possible. But we saw this story last season with the Ravens when they had no Edwards and they had no Dobbins. They brought guys in and just let them compete for the role. And they gave them touches and the hot hand. And if I look at, and I said this last week on the show, if you didn't listen, if I'm sitting there and I'm thinking, which one of these two do I think is going to have a more explosive performance if they have similar workloads? It's going to be Kenyan Drake, because we've seen Kenyan Drake have good seasons, have good productive games. We've seen Mike Davis in that sort of role at Carolina where he had a really good spell at the first sort of point of the year and then really tail off. And then, he lost that role. You've got to remember that he had a huge volume role. And when it came time to re-sign him, they didn't. They went with Chuba Hubbard. That says to me everything. That says that they weren't happy with what they got in Carolina. It says all I need to know about Mike Davis, that he's going to put up points. I can see why people look at him in the waiver wire, but I'm looking for upside. I don't want a guy who's just going to get me 8, 9, 10 points. I want a guy who can potentially win that role in opening weeks and have a role going forward. So give me Kenyan Drake. I think Kenyan Drake is the guy who could really pop week 1, have a really, really good week. And he might not. It is a gamble. It's a big risk. But if I'm having to bet on one of those two guys, my money's on Drake. Another really intriguing option here is Daryl Williams. Now, he's in Arizona right now. 7.2% owned. They're KC week 1. Not necessarily the best matchup here. Really isn't the best matchup here. I'm really intrigued by what sort of role Daryl Williams is going to have here in Arizona. And there's 2 reasons for this. The first one is we know Connor gets injured. I know he had a phenomenal year last season. I know he got paid for it. He deserves it. I really like James Conner. I really like James Conner this year. I think he's a very, very good fantasy football pick. I have him in a lot of teams. But I am slightly intrigued by what they do with Daryl Williams. Is Daryl Williams going to get more work than Edmonds did last year? Is he going, or Nino Benjamin? Is he going to force his way into the conversation here? Is he going to get some workload? This is a sneaky suspicion that I think he could really earn a relevant role. And again, he might not. The way I look at this with Daryl Williams is he's free right now. You can get it for $0. No one's challenging you for Daryl Williams unless they're watching this. I'd be just sneaking him on a few rosters. Just add him in a couple of places and just see what happens. week 1, week 2. If he doesn't do it, you cut him, you lose nothing. But just have an eye, because just in the back of my mind, I just can't help but think there is something with Daryl Williams. I think there's an opportunity for him to get a pass catching role or a role of significance. Plus, with knowing that James Conner gets hurt as much as he does, that sort of premium handcuff role. And I think that being a flex play with the premium handcuff role is exciting. We've seen this with Pollard and a couple of other guys. So I think I'm just a little bit intrigued by Daryl Williams. I'm not saying it's going to pan out, but I think I would be sprinkling him on a couple of rosters for free right now and see where it goes. Other running backs just over 30% owned that you could be potentially looking at here if they're free in your leagues. Brian Robinson's been dropped a lot because of what's happened. I'd be adding him at 37%. I'd be adding him where I can, stashing him on IR if you've got an IR spot. The fact that he was put on the NFI list and it's a 4-week list speaks to me that they really are confident he's going to come back. And don't forget, he was tipped to be the starter there. So he's got the faith of the coaching staff. He's someone I'd be stashing for the second half of the season, especially if you've got an IR spot, because he's not even taking a spot on your roster. So he's one I would absolutely be stashing everywhere I can. And I really like Jamal Williams at 34%. We know Swift gets hurt. We know Swift misses time. And I appreciate Jamal Williams is not a huge running back one most weeks if he gets the role kind of guy, but he's a solid RB2. And again, we're talking about a guy that's pretty much free in the majority of leagues and not going to cost you anything to add to your roster now. If you're thinking about a handcuff, likely to accelerate and get a better role, someone you might be able to trade at a later date if they do have good games. Jamal Williams is that sort of guy there for me. It's slightly over the 30% owned on ESPN. Moving on to wide receivers. This is a good bunch out there. There's a really, really good bunch of wide receivers. So I'm gonna pick 3 under 30% owned right now. The first one is Nico Collins. Nico Collins is 18.8% owned. So he has the Colts in week 1. I do think the Colts are going to get at this game very, very early, and I think Davis Mills is going to be required to throw the ball. Now, if they put the coverage on Cooks, it's going to leave Collins with some open looks. There's a bit of a question mark what they're going to be doing at tight end. Everyone's on Brevin Jordan. They tried to trade Brevin Jordan. He didn't work out for a medical reason. They've just signed OJ Howard. There's not enough time for him to really get involved in a heavy ordeal straight away. It makes me think everything's tipping towards the second look being Collins. And I know we've got Damian Pierce in the backfield again. Everyone thought it'd be Marlon Mack. It's Damian Pierce. How's Damian Pierce going to react in that pass catching role? Again, some question marks there. Everything points towards Nico Collins potentially being very productive in week 1. And I'm not saying he's someone you should stay on your roster long term, although I do think Nico Collins is a good player. And I think that the Texans offense will be better this year than it was last year. But I think in week 1, this scenario here of them having to chase a game, them having to put the ball through the air, and then potentially taking Cooks out of the game. The Colts are very, very defensively well schemed. Will fully understand that Cooks is the main danger threat here. It's not going to be Pierce, and they're going to sit there and they're going to give Collins his looks. They're going to give him opportunities to make plays. I'm not saying they'll probably contain him a bit, but he's going to be able to get those sort of sideline catches and those sharp routes just cutting inside there. And they're going to give him some routes over the middle where he will be able to make those sort of 15-yard gains, because they're quite happy to give that up over the big play over the top. And I think you're going to see a lot of those sort of containment routes where they'll go, okay, with no real tight end there, you might run a few of those routes or routes into the middle of the field there. And I think that's where you might see Nico Collins kind of operate at times in this game. And so I like Nico Collins to get a sort of 6 or 8 catches for 70 to 100 yards. That is in the range of outcomes for me. That's why I quite like Nico Collins this week. If he's free, 18.8% owned, he's still my number 1 streaming pick for week 1. Another one I really like as well, I think that is going to be really popping off in week one, is Isaiah Mckenzie, 11.9% owned. They're away at the Rams on Thursday Night Football. It's always that worry about Thursday Night Football, putting a guy in, and I get it 100%. But Isaiah McKenzie is going to potentially have a good shot at getting this third wide receiver role. Now, again, you've got Diggs, you've got Gabe Davis. But, Isaiah McKenzie is quick. He can definitely beat coverage, and he can definitely make plays. We saw this down the stretch last year when Gabe Davis was out. He had that monster game at the end of the season. And just think in this sort of game, they're going to want to take risks, Buffalo. This is a tough opening game against the Super Bowl champions, against a very good defense here. They're going to want to take shots. I think Isaiah McKenzie's the guy that they will look to exploit, maybe try and overload with Davis, Diggs, and McKenzie. Do some 3 wide receiver sets, really push the ball down the field, and see if they can get one of these guys open. So don't be too surprised if you see Isaiah McKenzie hit pay dirt in week one with quite a reasonably long range touchdown. So this is something that you can, I won't say gamble on, but if you're kind of struggling for some ideas and you're projected to lose a matchup and you need a guy who could really pop, Isaiah McKenzie could be that guy who is free right now, who you can really take a shot on at wide receiver 2, wide receiver 3 position. Don't put him in your flex. Definitely don't play players on Thursday Night Football in your flex. I've said this a million times. I'll say a million times more. Do not do it. So yeah, like Isaiah McKenzie here. Another one, if you're really struggling for starters, you're in a really deep league, I've got one for you, Noah Brown. Noah Brown is on the Dallas Cowboys. He's 0.4% owned. Everyone's going with Tolbert week one. Everyone's thinking Tolbert's the guy. Tolbert's the guy who's going to, pick up from the Michael Gallup injuries, the wide receiver 2. That's going to take time. Now, in the preseason, Dak Prescott did not throw to Jalen Tolbert. Didn't happen. They've had very little time together. In the meantime, if you've been listening to the beat writers and you've been following the coverage, and if you haven't, I definitely recommend you try and find big coverages from every player or every team. Dak Prescott's been talking an awful lot about Noah Brown, his connection with Noah Brown. He thinks that Noah Brown's a great professional. He's a guy who's earned Dak Prescott's trust here. And I think in the early games here, again, they're playing Tampa Bay. It's a tough game they need to win. Yes, CeeDee Lamb is going to be the primary target in that game, but this ball's going to go in the air a lot. So I think there's going to be plenty of targets on show. I think Schultz is going to get his. I think Lamb's going to get his. I think there's a role here for somebody else, and I'm not sold week one. It's going to be Tolbert. I really think actually Noah Brown could be this guy just because of comments said and the way that relationship seems to be developed between Prescott and Brown. I'm not saying that Brown is going to win this role all season. I'm not saying that Tolbert is going to be washed up and sitting on the outside looking in. Far from it. I think Tolbert is an excellent prospect, and I think him and Gallup will play a lot this season. I think Brown is someone who is a week 1, week 2 play, and then you fade him because I don't think he's got a long-term role on this roster. But I think just now, you're walking in, familiarity is so important. I think that is going to be tying to him potentially having a pretty decent week 1. So if you're in a deep league, struggling for a starter, Noah Brown, he should be there, 0.4% owned, so he should be there. I like him on week 1. Or again, someone you can stash and potentially trade. If you're looking for players who are over 30% owned, players to potentially watch out for on your waiver wires. Let's have a quick look here. Josh Palmer, 33.6% owned. I think he's going to have a role. Michael Gallup talks about him. He is 39.4% owned. A lot of people worried about that injury. Does look like he's going to play sooner rather than later. He's a player I'm definitely intrigued in a lot. And DJ Chark is only 43% owned. I think he's going to have a pretty solid role. And if you're looking for some players to potentially stash for later on in the season, Jameson Williams, 23.7% owned. He's not going to play for the first 4 weeks. But again, if you've got that IR spot, similar to what I mentioned with Brian Robinson, I'd be picking him up and be stashing him. I think second half of the season, he's going to get a very solid role. So I definitely like the look of having Jameson Williams on my IR as a free player that can just sit there until time comes to punch the button on him. Tight end, gone with Gerald Everett this week, 11.5% owned. He is at the Chargers now, and the fact that I know that Jared Cook didn't do well in that role last year. I do think it's different. I think Everett gives a little bit of a different dynamic, especially in the red zone. We know, if you can get a piece of this Chargers offense, it's something that you definitely want to mention. I just briefly mentioned Josh Palmer there. Give me as many pieces of this offense as you can. It's dynamic. It's going to be a big game against the Raiders. We know this is an important game. I do think that Everett is someone who is just sneaky worth, and Dan has been talking about him all summer long. I'm with him on this. I do think he's someone you should be keeping an eye on. And if you're struggling at tight end, there's no better option this week than Gerald Everett to see what happens. If you're really not fancying Gerald Everett, Cameron Brate, who Stacey picks, 1.5% owned, he is likely to get the start and likely to get the red zone looks. And again, shoot out against the Cowboys. You'd like to think that they will get tight in the red zone. We know how good this red zone defense was last season. We know how likely it's going to be good this season under Dan Quinn as defensive coordinator for the Cowboys. They're going to have to get big body guys there to make catches. Brate does it. He knows how to get the ball in pay dirt. He knows how to make those catches when it matters. So I really like Brate as a sort of streaming option this week as well. And he's only 1.5% owned. So if you're looking for a touchdown or bust guy, Cameron Brate seems to be that. Everett slightly more, maybe a long-term play if you're desperate at that position. Just leaves me with kicker and DST. Kicker and DST, same team. I've gone with Randy Bullock of Tennessee and the Tennessee Titans. Again, I just think this matchup against the Giants is too good to exploit. I think that, I look at the first 4 weeks of the season. I've talked about this with Tennessee. Okay, the Bills isn't great, but I do think, they can really contain the Giants, the Raiders, and the Colts. I think they're good games to score points on as a DST. So I do like them as an early week streaming option. Again, week 2 is not great against the Bills, but I think in all those other games, I think they're a good bet to put points up early on. So that's why I quite like them as an early streaming bet. I think I couldn't get their ESPN ownership, but they're 28% owned on Sleeper. In terms of Randy Bullock, he's pretty much free everywhere. He's 3-4% owned. He's not very popular, but I think again, week 1, likely to score some points. He had a pretty good record last season. They did bring him back. Didn't play the full season. Don't think he started the season, but he was pretty consistent down the stretch. I think he was 25 to 31 field goals. A couple of those were quite long outside of his range that he missed. He didn't miss too many. Didn't miss too many extra points. I think he's 42 or 45 as well. So pretty good record for Randy Bullock. And I think, week 1, he's definitely someone that can turn over and get some points. And I think, he's likely to get that. So I do think Randy Bullock is a nice, good option there on waiver wise. I think Ryan Suckup is there as well due to the fact that they were a bit unsure if he was going to make it or not. He was on the roster bubble. He did make the roster. So you can exploit that situation and pick Ryan Suckup up. Ryan Suckup is going to potentially score a lot of points as well, especially in that shootout game opening week. So definitely take advantage of that. And that will do it. That will do it for the Waiver Wire show for week 1. I can't believe it, already here. Do send in any questions if you have any. I hope you found this useful. Again, as I sort of mentioned, Fab, as the weeks go on with the show, I'll mention Fab amounts, how much you should be bidding on each player. Week 1, as I said, just don't bother. Just keep your Fab. Pick up $1 or $2 max. Total spend. I'm not spending more than $1 on any player at this point. So stay away from that as much as possible. And don't forget, it is week 1. So it's going to be a lot of overreaction. There's some players who are under 30% owned. I didn't mention who potentially could be long-term bets. Romeo Dubs or Dubes, or however we're pronouncing his name now, is out there and he's under 30% owned. A lot of players who potentially, especially that wide receiver position, it's very, very deep. So don't get sucked into the new hotness. Stick to your plan, but rotate these guys. This is why I always talk about roster management. Always have a couple of spaces on your roster where you can just turn over, try players out, keep buying those lottery tickets as much as possible. So, but that will do it for week 1. Look forward to bringing you the flagship show not long after this, and we're going to have a really, really good week 1. Check out all the articles over at 5 Yard Rush. There's going to be a lot of content there this week. So 5yardrush.co.uk. And don't forget, as always, keep rushing.